Michael, thank you so much for joining me today. It's an absolute delight to see you after a little time. And you're in Canada right now.
Yes, I'm on sunny Vancouver Island. We're actually below the 49th parallel, which is the traditional Canada-US boundary. So I'm south of what is our Canadian boundary, but still in Canadian territory. But the odd thing for me right now is I could go out, in my backyard, look to the right, and I see Washington State, Mount Baker. But I can't go there because we have a closure of the Canadian border to only essential traffic. And that's where most of my friends are in this neighborhood. That's where I travel to the most, even more so than mainland Canada. We can't go there, and it now looks like it'll be extended for another month. So it kind of adds to the feeling of isolation, but so far so good, coping okay.
Fantastic. And Michael, for those people who don't know you well, please tell us what you do.
I get that question a lot. So I'm currently labeled, if you see me on CNN or BBC, as a global affairs analyst. And I have a background of journalism and also humanitarian aid / spokesperson. I was spokesperson for UNICEF, global spokesperson based in Geneva. And also I'm very well known still for being spokesperson for the Organization for Security Cooperation in Europe. 57 member states, most of them in Europe, for my time working for them in Ukraine. But that last kind of full-time job I had was a pivot for me to being a global affairs analyst. And I do mostly commentary now. What I say to people is I try to connect the dots so they don't have to. In other words, connecting why does something that could happen in China, for example, affect us in Europe and the global south, places like that. And my main kind of venue for commentary right now is, I'm very privileged to say it, is CNN Opinion. So it has a very, very large readership and influential writers. So I write about anything from, currently very heavily about the COVID-19 pandemic, but also the other day I was researching North Korea. Right now I'm looking at the spike in cases in Russia. So I wrote recently about the closure of the Canadian border. So it could be anything at any time, but it's a very demanding job in the sense that you really have to keep your finger on the pulse of things. But more importantly, you have to make sense of what's going on in the world. And I know in the past, you and I have talked so much about having a very robust network. And I always say, Louise, my network provides. And for a lot of these really tough think pieces to get context and background, I turn to my network, and they really help me a lot through this, through trying to really figure out why certain things happen in the world, but what does it mean in the larger context? And I think kind of to wrap this question up of yours is that's what a lot of people are looking for these days, especially with COVID-19, because it's very easy to get in the thick of things and frustrated and, get really buried with the statistics. But to be able to open things up a little bit for people and say, well, this is what may or may not happen weeks or months from now is, I think, very important to provide to people.
No, Michael, I guess, in a funny way, we sort of touch base every now and again when there are global things going on. And I'm certainly always looking to get your insight on things. And there couldn't be a more salient moment than right now. And I'm really excited to talk to you and to learn what you've learned so far. So the obvious immediate question is, how does this affect me? And I know that it's very unusual for you to be in one place for quite some time.
That's for sure.
And unable to move around. And certainly, as you say, you might be able to, sort of wave over the border, but, you're not going to get there anytime soon, or probably shouldn't. So Michael, tell me what are the most, I don't even know where to start, because you are a global analyst and it is a big topic. But just in terms of where we are today, what have you seen as the major shifts and changes? I know that certainly from my perspective, one of the first things that happened was, that there are the hard facts, which I think are yet to be revealed. And then there is how people are responding. And this is a very human crisis. It's not based on a financial crisis, unlike other times. And I know that you've been through a crisis like this, similar to this before. Perhaps start there and how this might compare.
Great question. Well, first of all, Louise, I mean, consider myself lucky because I am used to working independently. I am used to working for long periods of time in isolation, no matter where I'm in the world. I'm very lucky because I can do most of my work remotely. But having said that, like anybody in this new normal, if you will, which is still playing itself out, one has one's good days and bad days. But I am observing, as you call it, quite a bit of a shift in many ways. But one of them is with how us as a society, as humanity, treat other people. And I don't mean to be glib about that, but what I mean is, recently I had a piece published yesterday about Singapore, and they were doing very, very well in terms of early and aggressive testing. Kept numbers to below 200 cases, but then it suddenly spiked. Why? Because they had a big blind spot, and that blind spot was the huge number of foreign workers they have working in Singapore, really crucial parts of the economy. But when they go home, they stay in these crowded, often unsanitary dormitories. So it was a perfect storm, if you will, for the COVID-19 to take off, and that is exactly what happened. But it's really, I think, shaken conservative society like Singapore to the core. It's, I shouldn't say forced, but let's say the word motivated the prime minister to say to the workers in a very memorable speech the other day, we will care for you just as we care for Singaporeans. That was a big thing to say. But I'm seeing that kind of played out elsewhere in the world. I mean, here, United States, United Kingdom, very, very big blind spots too. What were they? Well, primarily the long-term health facilities. It's a disgrace of what has been allowed to go on in those particular facilities, the neglect, the lack, especially of supervision. So governments are being now forced to regulate these places and make sure that our seniors, who are not only very important members of our community, but are also very, very vulnerable to COVID-19, be better taken care of. And then the other people on the front line, the healthcare workers, of course, the bin man, as they call them in the United Kingdom, ordinary people. You hear people give their thanks, but it's one thing for us to say thank you and to put up hearts. Every second house around me has a heart dedicated to frontline workers. But I think the important thing here is that we reevaluate their conditions too. Things like minimum wage, health benefits. Not as much an issue here, but much, much more in the United States. This is really kind of torn the scab off, if you will, of American society and showing how African Americans and Latinos, minorities are very, very vulnerable to this sort of thing. Sure, it's easy to say, okay, you have to work at home for the next few weeks, but a lot of people don't have that luxury of working from home. They live with extended family, things like that. A lot of part of the research that I was doing previously to the pandemic was about technology and smartphones, and I found that a lot of households which earn under $30,000 a year, which includes a lot in the United States, don't have broadband or Wi-Fi. So it's impossible for them to do things like telemedicine, work from home, even get basic information. So I'm hoping that the silver lining from all of this will be that not only do we change our attitudes to all of these frontline workers, but also we provide better for them. That's going to be really, really important coming out of this. The other thing, I think people are reevaluating themselves, their values, what they do from day to day. It's going to be really interesting. We're now seeing it of people, well, I hope you've got used to working from home because there's going to be more of it, even when we recover from this. Twitter, just for example, said that their employees are going to probably work from home indefinitely. What's going to happen to those masses of office spaces in the city of London and elsewhere where people may say, maybe it's time to think about giving people a better balance of life, more choices, being able to work more independently. not commuting 2 hours every day, which is very, very common in places like London or Silicon Valley. What benefits will this have for the environment? People are starting to think about travel, as I am, of course. Maybe we don't need to jump on an airplane to go to Cannes or Hawaii or something like that. Maybe we're better staying at home or exploring our local areas. So people finally, I think people are also becoming much more connected with their own communities, which is very good. For example, I'm finding myself reading a lot more local news to stay informed, because I know I'll be here for quite some time, and I want to know more people here, and I want to know my neighbors better. So that's all positive things I think that will come out of this.
Michael, you've touched on so many topics. I'm not quite sure where to go with this. Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, I did the commute in and out of the city in London for 20 years. I mean, it was, it was, there was no choice, right? And if I look back, I'm sure, I mean, it was probably before we were technologically enabled to be able to work in the way that we are today. But I'm sitting here in South Africa, and, we're talking about communities that don't necessarily have connectivity, here at the tip of Africa, our cost of data is quite extraordinary in comparison to a lot of countries. And I think the vulnerabilities in all of our systems are being revealed to us, and our truths and myths about life, about how it should work, about how business works, are really falling away before our eyes. My greatest concern is that, of course, for some people who are not hugely affected at all, the desire and the drive will be, to go back to some semblance of normal, or to recreate some semblance of normal. And the disparities between, 10 people who are perhaps crowded into a small home in a township in Africa with limited connectivity. I mean, how do we reconcile? So there is a great reckoning. People talk about the Great Reset, which for me sounds incredibly like stop-start. It's a hard stop. It's a hard start. And I don't believe that is the case at all. In some cases, yes, life stops, and we really literally have to think about a better way, smarter way forward. And for some of those people, it's just not possible. So there is almost a great reckoning, and I don't mean reckoning in terms of some external power, but a reckoning, a readjustment, a looking at every single the way that we operate. And I think perhaps for the first time, many people have become aware of those disparities and how brutal they are, and our collective need to solve them together. Just from a leadership perspective, Michael, because you talk to leaders all the time, on camera, off camera. Your network is extensive. What sense are you getting around leadership styles, the leadership resilience, leadership agility, all of these things that really, are so vital at this moment in time?
It's something I've been thinking about a lot, because I start most of my mornings in a very exotic way, usually with a WHO press briefing, or listening to my prime minister or deputy prime minister, and then a variety procession of premiers from across Canada speak, Governor Cuomo as well. But what I'm finding is that this is really shaking things up, in the sense that we're finding out who is a leader and who isn't. This is something you can't hide from. If you have weak leadership skills, and say you're a premier or a mayor or a governor of a state, it's going to show very, very quickly, because it's all hands on deck right now. These are times when strong leadership, vision, empathy are all required. And I don't mean to get political, but sad to say, we're not seeing this coming from the White House whatsoever. So what does that mean? Is the governors, the mayors have really had to step up. And I'm just amazed by the leadership and just the empathy that oozes whenever he speaks. Is Governor Andrew Cuomo of New York. Obviously the epicenter, not only of the United States now, but of the world in terms of COVID-19 outbreaks, but has really stepped up to the plate, and is now being talked about as a potential candidate for president down the road. But also, here in Canada as well. A lot of you can see more easily who the premiers are. You see, running as a premier of a province or as a mayor actually doesn't take a lot of skill. Sometimes it's luck. You have to get through the election and then you're in. But that's when the hard work starts. And I think a lot of these politicians have, they just have been going through the daily grind and have never really dealt with an emergency of this scale before. So it really requires a lot of creativity and a lot of risk taking as well. I mean, if you do not perform well, if you don't put in the proper policies, people will die, people will get sick, and you will get thrown out of office. So that's been very interesting. The other thing is there have been a lot of winners and losers already in the corporate sphere. One of the brands that I closely have followed for quite some time, maybe it's because I'm a TEDx speaker, is the TED brand. Up until now, it's been one of the most powerful brands in the world. But talk about a company that got caught flat-footed. It seems to me they had very little contingency plan for this, because most of their events, of course, involved getting lots of people together in one particular venue and close quarters and listening to a very motivational speaker. But that all went out the window very quickly. So then they tried to pivot to doing interviews out of the living rooms of their houses, and their viewership has just plummeted. I've seen some as low as 20 or 22,000. So that was very interesting. The other one's real carnage going on in the travel industry. I've seen some corporate leaders take this on board right away and think about how can we get through this. But the fact is that no one knows. Even if you put in, for example, proper procedures and measures, I'll give you a couple of examples. Marriott International has been one of the first not only to propose certain measures to make their staff and guests safe in the future, but also the communication of their CEO in newsletters to people like me has been very, very good, very impressive. Another brand I've been very impressed with is Emirates Airlines. They're one of the very first to offer their cabin crew PPE, right down to kind of surgical gowns. I mean, really great protection, but also taking steps to reassure the flying public, introducing tests before they board. So all of that signal to me not only leadership, but kind of vision, and of course, risk taking as well. I mean, the other thing I saw yesterday from our own flag carrier, Canada, I mean, they blasted out to everyone these new measures on the ground and in the air of what they're going to do. But my goodness, anyone who would read that would say, I'm not flying for a while, because it's just way too much. And I think brands and companies like that have to do a little bit more thinking about what they're going to do. But you really have to put your leader out front there and say, trust me, we've researched this, we've collaborated with the CDC or whoever, we really, really feel what we're doing is the right way to go. But so far, I haven't heard that from many leaders, but they really have to be out front and level with people right now.
So, Michael, you've actually touched on what I would think of as experience brands, right? So we physically need to be present to experience or get on an airline or be in a hotel room and somewhere other than home, right?
Yeah.
And TED, once again, as in the audience, as an experience or as a speaker, speaking to an audience. And I think that this whole realm of the experience economy is the one that we're going to see the most dramatic change in. Of course, it makes sense, right? Mm-hmm. So, if we look at the pivoting that's necessary, a lot of these organizations, there isn't really an easy way to change what they deliver. The only thing they can do is, in the limited ways that they can deliver, or the cutback ways that they might start opening up, is to protect those people who are using their brand to experience whatever it might be, travel or hotel stays, or perhaps coming together with other people. But, I was chatting to somebody the other day in London, and we were talking about, and I just said to him, what's the first thing you want to do when this, when we can move around a little bit more? And he said to me, well, I want to go to a restaurant,
Sure.
My favorite restaurants. And I just, we talked about it a little bit, and I said, well, imagine going to the Ivy, on a Friday night, or, Chelsea Farmers Market on a Sunday to meet your friends, and, having just wandering around down King's Road, and we're almost working on the memory of an experience that is so attractive to us, right?
Yes.
And wanting to recreate that memory. I think it's going to be hugely disappointing because, of course, we're going to have an altered experience. You do that 2, 3, 4, 5 times with an altered experience, sitting in a restaurant far away from other people, and being served by somebody who, or perhaps sitting with screens, as we've seen some countries, I think it's Korea, that already have put those up. And, the gloss is going to come off our romantic memories of great times that we've had in certain settings and certain doing certain things. Yeah. So I think, this is such a fundamental shift in who we are and how we do things and how we experience life. The other thing that really struck me the other day is I was chatting to my brother, who has a son who will go to university next year, and or not,
or not,
yeah, absolutely. And I've been fortunate to have these conversations with a couple of deans of business schools, and very enlightening, looking at what may happen to education and where we might go with all of this. So just the human experience of what we might expect, I think they're going to be whole levels of disappointment. And building our emotional resilience, without a doubt, look, we don't know what's coming, but we do know that if we're looking to recreate the experience of what was, it's not there. It's not going to be there. Or so we've got to come back to the self. We really do have to invest in building our resilience, trusting our intuition, going within, and finding perhaps that central golden thread of connectedness to each other, to ourselves. And that's not the easiest journey for many of us. There are times in life where it's either easier than others, but we're almost being forced to do that right now. And, one thing I noticed right at the start is how people were responding to this crisis. A lot of people went into the blame game, and we started blaming the government and Trump and God and consumption of wild animals. And, we went into that real angry blame game. And then, of course, there were another group of people who, really were very focused on finding the meaning, the Gaia reset, the spiritual reconnection, and the meaning crowd. And then of course there were the policemen and women who really went into increasing volumes of telling us what to do in great panic. And perhaps we've all flip-flopped between each of those at different times, but really fundamental to all of that is this human resilience. And I think in recent years, the nature of how we live our lives hasn't lent itself to building resilience, in that way. There is always an easy route to feeling better, to finding. And the book that you were writing was all about our addiction to screens, and the hit of dopamine that we get out of that. So yeah, I'll stop warbling on about the topic and hand it over to you and ask you what do you feel about all of this? I mean, it's almost like this chapter is yet to be written.
Indeed. In fact, speaking of the book, which was tentatively called Digital Crack, I had a talk with a few of my kind of peer mentors, and the strong feeling is to do a couple of things with it, is to pivot it to deal more with coronavirus. I think it's very, very interesting the role technology has played. I have to be honest with you, in a lot of the writing of the chapters of my book, especially when it comes to gaming addiction, especially when it comes to young people and smartphones, technology was kind of presented as the demon here, as the bad guy. But in this, I was just thinking of this yesterday. Imagine going through this pandemic with no Wi-Fi, internet, technology, Zoom, Facebook, all that stuff. Very, very, very difficult. So it's really especially helped older people who are in especially tight quarantines for obvious reasons to get through this and stay connected with families. So I think it's really shifted. That's part of one of the good things. But, going back to what you said, Louise, is I think it was about a week ago where I woke up for the first time, and it really, really struck me that life will not be the same again, especially what you talked about, the going out, the spontaneity of going out to meet friends, the travel. I have to qualify, though. I mean, once a vaccine comes along, we may be able to snap back to normal, but that snapping back to normal may not be what we had in the past because we've perhaps reevaluated things. And I'm thinking, maybe instead of going out, people will be entertaining more at home or looking at other activities. I've heard a lot of friends and contacts say, wow, this has been a really great opportunity to go through my list of friends and decide who's toxic and who isn't and who I should be spending more time with. That's been a very interesting phenomenon as well. And, it has to be said to, just go ask Mother Nature. There's been a lot of excess over the years, and that has not done well for the nature and for the environment. A lot of people are commenting now how nice it is to be at home and you can hear noises you have never heard before. I mean, even I'm so fortunate I live on a harbor and there's a nature reserve here rather. And we usually get a lot of bird noises, but nothing like this before. So that's very nice. And, the past 2 or 3 days, I've noticed not only more road traffic, but also looking up the skies, more airplanes in the air. And I didn't feel good about it. I thought, we're going to miss those days where we had that serenity and that really starting to feel more in touch with nature. I think parts of that will stay. I'm really excited to hear municipalities or jurisdictions now talking about widening the streets for pedestrians or bicycles, maybe even doing pedestrian-only streets. If you go to one of my favorite cities, Lisbon, you can walk through the whole city very, very easily because it's one of those cities in the world that was made for pedestrians. And I think we'll be seeing a lot more of that. So that's all going to be very good. But we really have to think about is how we're going to relate with other human beings and socialize. One of the unanswered questions I have in my mind right now is, if you walk down the street right now, if you go to the supermarket, you play this kind of dance with people, they avoid you and you try to avoid them. I think that even if we bring the numbers way, way down, maybe even once the vaccine comes, people will still be a bit wary of each other. And that worries me because it's not in our human nature. In Europe, you've spent a lot of time there. A lot of Mediterranean countries, people love to kiss each other right from the bat. I love that. I think we won't be seeing that for a while. So a lot of unknowns out there, but me being an optimist, I think a lot of good will come out of this. But one last thing is the xenophobia that is being sadly promoted by the White House. We feel it because we live so close to the United States, blaming China for this, blaming the Asian community. I don't think that's going to be very good for us. In fact, there's a lot of division right now in the United States that was probably there before, but is now coming up to the surface in terms of how quickly people go back to restarting the economy. And their numbers are not looking good. Their testing is way below what it should be right now. And I'm glad to say that yesterday, our Prime Minister said what a lot of Canadians, including myself, are feeling right now is as painful as it is, we're going to keep our border with the United States closed. It's a painful thing to do considering it's so much billions of dollars comes across every day. But the cargo, the produce and all of that is continuing, but the people flow has gone down to almost zero, but we had no choice to do that to protect ourselves. We have worked so hard in Canada, we've come so far to beat down this pandemic. We don't want to let it go up in smoke all of a sudden.
Yeah, so important, Michael. And just thinking about the vaccine, I hear what you say around the rise of all sorts of, almost undesirable thinking. And, it's back to that blame game that I was talking about. Funnily enough, in your book, Digital Crack, you talk about being addicted to a screen. And we know from neuroscience that we're actually addicted to blaming others because it gives us the same hit of dopamine, funnily enough. Yes. But that's a whole other topic, right? But just a moment on the vaccine. And, I was talking to a client in New York last week. I work with their leadership team, and she said to me, Louise, you've got to understand, and she's very much in the connected to the whole medical side of things. And she said, yes, we might have, let's say we, by some miracle, have a vaccine, and we manage to give it to every single person on the planet. But, in a year's time, we've got to wait for the second wave. We've got to wait for another year of that. So I think that all of the human behaviors that we've talked about, that distancing, the social distancing, how we actually move around, how we greet other people, all of that, there's going to be over the next couple of years, a real shift, and, who knows what we'll come back to. So I think without a doubt, we've got to do this with heart. And we've got to do it with kindness and empathy, first and foremost to ourselves, and of course with each other. Michael, it's been an absolute delight talking to you. My sentiment at the moment is let's come back and do this again in a few months' time.
Anytime.
And see what we've learned and what we've discovered and what we've observed. But yeah, thank you so much for your time. It's great to see you.
You're welcome, and I really regard you as a very astute kind of student of the human condition. It's always so interesting also to hear your views as well. But please do stay safe and keep on top of it like you always do.
Yeah, thank you, Michael.
Welcome.